Hello everybody. Wanted to do a video. Now at this point I've done about 20 drafts or so of this format, 8 of them online and then at least a dozen in paper. Wanted to do a sort of recap of the format. I've ended up doing a lot less online drafts than I had expected. Mainly that's because I guess Modern Masters 3 boxes have still been available. And so I've kind of been convinced to buy more than I normally would have. I kind of expected at this point that prices would have shot up and there would be not that much supply, but I guess the print run is just really large, and so I've been having, I guess it's a pleasant surprise, but it does mean that I've had less content on this channel than I expected. In any case, wanted to do, while it was still somewhat relevant, a sort of recap video of the format, what cards I think are good, what my thoughts were on the format and how they've changed over time. And yeah, let's get straight to it. So I think blue is just the best color in this format, hands down. I really don't like playing any of this green-white sort of mid-rangey stuff. I think this format is pretty slow. It's slower even than I had anticipated, and I had anticipated it being fairly slow. And I'm really enamored with blue, black X. I think that's kind of where you want to be, because I like having a lot of removal in my decks. And if you go sort of blue, green, white with Bant, you're not really finding very much in the way of removal. But if you go the other direction towards black and red, you find a lot of removal. And you can have a very powerful controlling deck. And you just need some win condition. Any win condition will basically get you there. And if you can go 4-color, that's even better. Although that depends on how highly you can draft fixing. So blue I feel is the best color. Green I think is the worst color. Before I said it was red, and I still don't really want to be one of these base red decks that's playing Mog Flunkies. But I think the deck that's running like Mog Flunkies and a bunch of aggressive stuff actually has a better chance than these sort of green-white tokens populate kind of mid-rangey type things. I think that those decks just really struggle against any sort of control deck, and they do well against the aggressive, almost near mono-red decks that you occasionally see. But those are much rarer. Certainly, a given pod can support, 3, maybe even 4 pretty slow control-y decks. It can really only support one of these mono-red aggressive decks. If 2 people are fighting over the Mog Flunkies, then probably neither of them are getting there. So I really don't like green in this format, because I think green-white is not particularly strong in what it's trying to do as a color pair. And I think that adding green to green-red kind of dilutes the red aggressive plan. You have to find some sort of fixing. You need to do all this stuff. I mean, I think you'd much rather be near mono-red or maybe even Boros. You get a little bit of red-white splash, because that fixing is a little bit easier to come across, the Boros Guild Gates and things of this sort. And then you play your Sky Knight Legionnaires and things of this sort, and you're basically just trying to Zerg them down. But I don't even like those aggressive decks, because I've had games where I play as a control deck and I stabilize at 2 life, 3 life, and then I win the game. And I've had games where I've gone up against the nuttiest of the mono red aggressive starts, where they've had Goblin Guide into Mog Flunkies plus Burning Tree Emissary, and they're just swinging for huge points of damage. But there's so many good defensive creatures. And here we see like Augur of Bolas, Seagate Oracle, things that fit in your deck pretty well, right? That aren't just like Kraken hatchlings, but are going to be good in other matchups as well. That'll hold the ground and stop these decks from doing anything. So I really think the format is very slow. I think you're going to have a lot of time to kind of dirtle around and get there. And I think that one of the big things that's changed in a lot of my evaluation of stuff is, I guess, things like Mist Meadow Witch and other things that basically just have a lot of high mana cost activation stuff has moved up a little bit. The Azure Mages of the format, these have gone up a little bit. I already had them reasonably high, just I wasn't super excited about them. I'm much more excited about them now as potentially a win condition with some other thing going on. But a lot of the cards that I'm really much higher on are things like Dinrova Horror. Dinrova Horror, I thought, well, this is a solid card, but it's still 6 mana. This is still going to be a reasonably fast set. Now, I think this card is really strong. This is sort of a bomby thing, and I would pick these up pretty highly. So overall, I think blue is the best color. You want to typically try and pair it with black and then red if you can. Go that direction. So blue-black is often where you want to be. Black because it's the color adjacent to blue that has the removal. And then if you end up Esper or you end up Grixis, that's fine. Just you need to find a certain amount of removal to clear away your opponent's bombs, and then find some bombs of your own. But the blue colors have so much going for you. Agony Warp if you're in blue black, which I think you should be. Really cheap, good removal. I've rarely seen this go very late. People are picking up this very highly, and I think that's a good idea because if blue black is the best color and this is one of the best commons in blue black, then of course you pick this up. I like Augur of Bolas as well. A lot of my decks have a lot of instants and sorceries, and as I said, this is just a good way to shut down a lot of these aggressive decks as well. They're attacking in with 2 power creatures, and this guy is just saving you 2 life a turn. I really like Ghostly Flicker in a lot of these decks. I think this has actually kind of moved up a lot in my book. I like it because it's blue, and a lot of my stuff is the battlefield effects that's relevant. And even if it's just a way of blanking removal or chump blocking, but then not really chumping because you're blinking your guys, usually you can get value out of that. Seagate Oracle is very strong. This is sort of a mainstay along with Augur of Bolas. Again, the 1/3 body is really good at defending. I've kind of come around to liking Tandem Lookout more. I like it more in the control builds than in the builds where it's just like I play a 2-drop turn 2 and then I play this guy and I get to draw a card turn 3. In the control builds, this guy is a source of repeatable card advantage that's kind of hard for them to deal with. A lot of decks, like the green-white decks, for example, they don't really have good ways of stopping this guy or removing him from the board. And if you have just one flyer, and you have a lot of flyers in your list, right, things like Mistraven that you're going to play, or even if you're just able to clear their board and keep them from playing things, if this guy starts drawing cards, he's good against pretty much any matchup. So I feel like this guy's actually moved up a little bit. I'm still not going to draft him very highly. I probably don't want more than 2 in my deck at any point, but I've actually kind of come around to liking this card. Cards that I really don't like are things like Talon Trooper. I think these just sort of... I've played against a fair amount of like Azorius aggro, right? Or like Bant aggro type stuff, and they'll run these guys, they'll run Youthful Knights, they'll run Core Hookmasters. I don't think that's really where you want to be in this format. Again, I think it falls into the same problems that the aggro decks do. There's just too much good defensive stuff going on here. The self-mill stuff is of kind of limited relevance. I think Forbidden Alchemy is maybe just still a little bit too slow. Pilfered Plans is alright. I mean, it's basically like a divination. But I really do like Mystical Teachings a lot. Being able to search up specifically what you want, which is usually just going to be more removal, I think is really good. Mistraven is absolutely fantastic. Rewind has moved up a fair amount in my book. Just having a format of counterspell is actually kind of worth it, given that the format is becoming very slow, or is very slow, and a lot of the time what you want to do to win a game is just counterspell whatever your opponent's bomb is. I've had a lot of games where I rewind my opponent's Cyclonic Rift. This is one of the things that happened in one of my online games. And then they lose the game because that was their only win condition. I think that just being able to counterspell Dinrova Horror or something like that is really strong. So I think like Rewind has moved up quite a bit in my book. Aethertoe is still pretty bad, not going to lie. Spire Monitor is okay-ish. I mean, but still, you're almost just getting him for a 3/3 flyer. The flash is not super relevant because there is a lot of stuff that you're often doing at instant speed, but it's not huge. And then Dinrova Horror, as I said, is absolutely gigantic. Grasp of Phantoms, I haven't liked a lot because it isn't a permanent answer to whatever your opponent's big threat in their deck is. And I think there's kind of a limit on how many bombs there are in this format. You want to destroy their bomb, not just delay it for a turn effectively. It's nice that it has flashback, and eventually you'll get to this flashback cost, but it does have the downside that you're not really doing what you need to do with your opponent's big threats, which is just getting rid of them. And sometimes you don't want to grasp a Phantoms like a Dinrova Horror. There's a lot of stuff the battlefield effects. This becomes pretty bad. So I think blue is the best color. There's a lot of really solid commons here: Mistraven, Seagate Oracle, Augur of Bolas. You can get Mystical Teachings pretty easily. Right, Rewind moves up in my book because I think the format is slow, and just being able to counter something for 4, even if you're not doing anything with the untapped lands, is good. Agony Warp is excellent whenever you can pick it up, and I never can. And then in the uncommon slot, you also have a lot of other really good stuff, right? Soul Ransom is quite fantastic. Oftentimes, it's been a little bit... It's been worse than Control Magic. There have been a number of games where my opponent's fine just pitching some cards. But other games, again... I think the format is slower and more revolving around having a big threat that you play to close out a game, right? In a deck that's otherwise a bunch of removal and stuff. This is like removal that's a 2-for-1, right? Because usually what they're gonna do is they're gonna use some of their removal to remove the creature, and it is a little bit worse in the sense that there is bounce and things of this sort, and they can do things like Mist Raven the creature, and I've had that happen. But I think this has stuck around enough times in the games that I've played it when it's played against me that I value it a lot. And then you have a lot of really, I think where you want to be is having these, 4/4 flyers like Tower Gargoyle, Moroi, even things like Wing Splicer are fine. Threats like that to close out the game are a really big deal. Soul Manipulation moves up a lot in my book, because again, I think a lot of this is about countering a big creature bomb, a threat that your opponent wants to stick. Soul Manipulation does that and has some added upside. Compulsive Research is fantastic. Azure Mage and Mist Meadow Witch. Mist Meadow Witch a little bit more narrow in what you're trying to do, but that's good. Familiar's Ruse. I've actually liked this card a lot, because a lot of times my deck is a bunch of Seagate Oracles, Augurs of Bolas, things of this sort, and this card has become really good. Is It Charm, also really good. Teleportal's still bad, I feel. I haven't really seen a good use for that. It's kind of a finisher in a sense, but again, like a lot of these decks that I'm talking about with this sort of blue-black X strategy don't have a lot of threats on the board. And if they have a lot of threats on the board, they're probably winning anyways because they're just removing whatever their opponent has and swinging in. Of course, all these tricolor guys are still really good, but Opportunity's fantastic. I haven't really gotten to blue-green because, again, I try to lean more towards blue-black, right? And getting 4 colors is a harder way to go. But blue, just overall, there's so many solid commons and uncommons. I really think this is the color you want to be in this set. And everything in blue and black, I think, moves up a peg in my book, and I'm much more willing to draft it first pick, because those are the colors I want to be in, and I'm willing to actually kind of force those colors. Agony Warp in particular is one of these cards that I think is very, very first pickable now because of the strength of this color combination. In black, you actually have a little bit less. I think none of this really sacrifice stuff. Bone Splinters, Mortician Beetle, the Unearthed stuff. I don't think any of that really got there. I don't really see a lot of strong decks running the Golgari Rotworms, right? I don't see a lot of strong decks getting value out of Mortician's Beetles or Vampire Aristocrats. I've seen a few of these where they did okay, but a lot of the basis of this deck working comes down to Falconwrath Noble. And I think this is a very, 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 very important card to get in almost any deck, because there are a lot of decks like the green-white decks that really just don't have an answer to this, right? Because they don't have removal to kill this guy, and they're still sort of an aggressive deck, and this guy just suddenly stabilizes everything against them. This guy can be a win condition on his own. I think the last draft that I put up was a deck that basically just had like 2 Falconwrath Nobles as its only win condition. I wasn't able to find any bombs, which only got me to 2-1 because eventually I went up against a guy who just played a bunch of 3/3s and gained too much life, and that was the problematic thing. But I think this guy is very, very strong. I think this guy is very first pickable. I didn't talk about him a lot because I thought that he would really only be relevant for the sacrifice strategy, and I didn't think the sacrifice strategy was very good. I was wrong about that. This guy's good in every deck. Even if you don't have a lot of creatures. I mean, even if you're just playing a deck where you just have your only creatures are 4 of this guy, you're perfectly fine because the rest of your deck is going to be removal. You're going to kill your opponent's creatures, and that's going to help stabilize you, right? And these guys are just beating for 2 in the air against a lot of decks. That's a win condition, right? You clear out whatever their air creatures are. You just keep beating in, and they don't have answers because their deck just doesn't have any way of removing this guy. So I think Falconwrath Noble is absolutely amazing. I pick him very highly. Dinner of a Horror, as I said, really, really good. Pick that very highly as well. Grizzly Spectacle, I think, is a card that I'm also, along with Augur Spree. These are cards that I'm willing to pick up very highly. Grizzly Spectacle more than Augur Spree because I'm not always blue, black, red. But having this sort of unconditional removal, non-artifact is something that has gotten me once. I wasn't paying attention and did not realize it was non-artifact, and took a non-profitable block as a result of that. But this card is going to destroy most of what your opponents can do, and I think is really solid. I'm even coming around a little bit to cards like Night Terrors or Recover, basically as ways of sort of getting card advantage. Recover can fetch back whatever. If you don't have that many threats, this will fetch back one of those threats. Night Terrors is like a good sideboard card against some of these control matchups where they just have a card that you can't really answer, and you just need to get rid of it. A lot of this feels like chaff that I'm not really excited about, But Denroval Horrors, even Grixis Slave Drivers, Grizzly Spectacle, Falconwrath Noble, a lot of this higher end stuff is really strong. And when you go to the uncommon slot, you see a lot of really good stuff. Seal of Doom, I think, is very good, very playable. Again, Soul Manipulation, Vampire Nighthawk is great. I think Inquisition of Kozilek is quite playable here. There's enough stuff, like this is just a way of slowing down or just, turn one, trading 1-for-1 with one of these aggressive decks effectively. Sin Collector, I think, is pretty solid. A lot of these cards are really good, right? The Morroys, Soul Ransom we talked about before. And Burial Rites has some pretty good value that you can get out of it. So it's good at the uncommon slot as well. And I think blue-black ultimately is where you want to be. As a consequence, one of the things that I've come to believe about this format is you want to be drafting Fixing very, very highly. I think a lot of people are drafting Fixing very highly, and you need to get yours. And in particular, any Fixing that gives you both blue and black, whether it's a Dimir Signet, whether it's Crumbling Necropolis or Arcane Sanctum, those are also, I think those are first pickable cards. The Tri-lands that have blue and black in them, I would pick very highly. In fact, I might even pick all of them first pick, except for the Naya one, I think Jungle Shrine, because I'm not really interested in being Naya. But any of them that have blue or black in them seem really strong because that's just some of the best Fixing you can get in this game. And I think Fixing is a really important part of this. And if you can go 4-color, you go 4-color. If you can go 3-color, you go 3-color. And kind of if you didn't get there, hopefully those 2 colors that you're left in are blue and black. But I really think 3-color, 4-color good stuff is where you want to be. The format's slow enough that your mana is going to get there. And there's just a lot of really powerful multicolored cards. And having the flexibility to grab as many of them as possible is really strong. Cards like Terminate, right? This is just instant speed, destroy target creature, better than Grizzly Spectacle, right? So much good stuff going on in these multicolor strategies that I think you draft the Fixing very, very highly in this format. You pick up blue and black cards when you can, and you draft the Fixing very highly, and I think that's the strategy for winning. As for sort of the rest of the colors, in red, again, I talked about how there's that sort of mono red deck that can sometimes get there. I think it is really, again, off the basis of your 2-drops. Dragon Fodders, Burning Tree Emissaries, Mog Flunkies, and I think you want to be close to mono red. I don't think you actually want to pair with green in a big way. I think you want to be pretty much mono red, and I think part of the idea is that a lot of decks out there are going to have trouble splashing for Chandra's Outrage, and this is a card that you're going to grab a bunch of this, and Thunderous Wrath I've seen going pretty late pretty often. And I think if you get enough Chandra's Outrages and Thunderous Wraths along with your 2-drops, then you have yourself a deck that can win a lot of games in this format, because the control decks are not going to be fast enough to stop that, right? They're going to have defensive creatures, but if your Mog Flunkies get in enough turns, right, or you feed them some Dragon Fodder tokens so you get in with your Mog Flunkies a few turns, something like that, right? You have enough burn to finish off a game, and the burn is going to you reasonably late, right? Because the blue-black splashing red deck might not have enough for Chandra's Outrage, right? Or certainly they might not be picking up the Chandra's Outrage soon enough, because they want to get their Fixing done first. So they're drafting the Crumbling Necropolises, they're drafting the Rakdos Signets, and it's not until they have sort of a critical mass of them that they're starting to say, okay, I can pick up the Chandra's Outrage, which means you get a few packs where you can get the Chandra's Outrages, a bunch of them. And I think there's almost no number of these that I wouldn't want to have in my deck. I just keep throwing in more and more and more and more burn, and you can win a lot of games like that. So I think a near mono red strategy is where you want to go. Just almost skip the green, and if you add in another color, I think you're almost as likely to add in white and get like Sky Knight Legionnaire just as something hasty to go along with your Mog Flunkies, or you go with where is he? Sunhome Guildmage. He's somewhere here, right? Sunhome Guildmage, right? Something like this, just basically for the +1/+0 effect. But I think those decks can get there as well. You don't want like your battle. You don't want anything in these 4-drop slots. I don't even think you want Scourge Devils, but you want the Chandra's Outrage and the Thunderous Wraths, and that deck can be good. But I don't know. You have to be almost the only drafter in the pod going that strategy, I feel, and you need to be able to pick up the Chandra's Outrages and the Mog Flunkies and the Dragon Fodders and Burning Tree Emissaries, and you can't really be fighting with another guy at the table for that sort of stuff. But there's enough stuff going on there that's solid at the common slot to support that strategy. Elsewhere, Ancient Grudge is fine. I think it's been playable. Again, I don't really want to be green though. So a lot of times this is just like a shatter that maybe sometimes I get some upside on. Not super excited about that, but there have been enough artifacts with the signets and with the artifact creatures, the splicer golems. This card has been passable. Pyroclasm is really one of these big cards that I want to have in my control decks because this kills off a lot of stuff that my opponents can have. I'm really happy when I'm the blue-black splashing red deck and I'm able to pick up Pyroclasms. Goblin Assault, I tried playing with this as a win condition in sort of a control-y deck, and I actually think it works pretty well. It's actually kind of difficult in the control mirror matchups for people to deal with the Goblin Assault, because you just keep on generating these 1/1s, and a lot of times there aren't a lot of great ways to deal with these 1/1s. If they don't have, that Augur of Bolas or that Seagate Oracle out, you can just start generating, like a lot of times you're just staring at each other with no creatures at all on the board, right? Just both people have a bunch of removal, and when you play Goblin Assault, you usually just win the game because you're both staring at each other with a bunch of removal, and these goblins aren't something they can deal with. There's a lot of 1-for-1 removal in this deck. They need to in this set. They don't have good ways of clearing off all these goblins or answering the assault itself, right? Disenchanting it. So eventually it'll get there. And I actually kind of like having Goblin Assault with Falconwrath Noble, right? You don't need to have a sacrifice synergy going on for the Falconwrath Noble to work, I feel. And if you get the Goblin Assault along with that, you can play it as a control card, actually, which I think is pretty interesting. So this is moved up in my book. I'm treating it more as a control card necessarily than an aggressive card. It works in aggressive decks as well, sometimes too, but I think it works in the control decks. Vithian Stinger is fantastic. This card is great. I still think this is very first pickable. Skursdad Cultist is okay. Again, I don't think the sacrifice strat has worked all that well. I'm not really excited about the rest of these cards. Goreclan Rampager, Carnage Gladiator. A lot of these cards just didn't get there for me. Because, again, I'm looking to play a slower control type game, and these cards just don't quite get there. Right? A lot of these just die to removal. Like, they get Augur Spreed, and you spent 4 mana, they spent 3 mana, you lost your creature. Then they draw some more cards with whatever their card draw engine is. But yeah, so I think the mono red deck, kind of an aggressive strategy, can get there. It really revolves around you having a lot of 2-drops and then not very much other stuff. I don't think you want almost any of these other cards. They're all bad except for Chandra's Outrage and Thunderous Wrath. And you just really want to pick up as many of these 2-drops as possible. If you have a deck with like 6 Mog Flunkies in it, you've gotten there easily. And that's how you win. But again, I still feel like these decks aren't... Even when you get there with the draft, I think these decks still sometimes have problems. There's just enough defensive cards, right? You go up against the control deck that has a bunch of Seagate Oracles, Augurs of Bolas, and you just don't quite get there, right? Eventually they stick, something on the board that gains them some life, and they stabilize, and you don't have profitable attacks anymore, and the life goes bad, and you Dynacharge, but you can't quite get them. I don't know. The deck, I've seen it work. I've seen it get there. I think it's better than playing the green-white sort of decks. But I'm more interested in red for things like Magma Jet, Augur Spree, maybe a Thunderous Wrath, but like Pyroclasm, Is It Charm, right? I'm interested in it for more removal, effectively. As for green, which I think is the worst color on the set, the nice thing about it is that if it is part of one of these 4-color strategies, then you get a lot of stuff with it, right? The Sylvan Rangers are pretty decent because they can fetch any basic land card, and that is some very important fixing. Avacyn's Pilgrim is good ramp for sort of control deck. There's sort of a ramp sub-theme going on here. And if you're topping out your list with things like Arachnus Spinner, this card is just so huge. It's very hard for your opponent to deal with it. You have Penumbra Spider. So, I don't know. Like, a lot of the cards here in this color are more mid-rangey, I would say. Like, a lot of it seems to be built around like a Call the Conclave or something similar, and then populating tokens of Call the Conclave. But there is also some interesting kind of control-y type stuff, ignoring the Hungry Spriggans, ignoring, I don't know, there's a lot of bad stuff in here. There's like Deathhood Cobra, Druid's Deliverance, Fist of Ironwood, I would even say is not that good because I'm not looking for that go-wide strategy. If you focus on sort of the ramp type stuff, then maybe you get there. right? I could see you playing a 4-color strategy where green is one of the colors and you have Sylvan Rangers. I played against a 5-color deck. I think in the last draft it was. That was the one where I lost against the 5-color kind of control deck where they had like Arachna Spinner, a bunch of Sylvan Rangers. I mean, I don't know. It was... I'm not sure it was base green, but it had a lot of green cards. I mean, it was playing things like Entomber Exarch and Mist Meadow Witch, and that's ultimately what got me. But yeah, there are some cards here that help you, but I don't know. I'm really not big on a lot of these cards, right? I Call the Conclave, I still think is core to what that deck is trying to do, but I just don't think it's good enough. A 3/3 for 2 mana is nice, and you can populate it and do some stuff there, and sometimes you'll get some wins. But there are just so many ways for this deck to get stopped, in particular because I think there's a lot of bounce in the format. And I've had matches where I'm playing my blue-black X control deck, and they're playing a bunch of tokens, and I'm getting to play Mist Ravens that read, you know, a 4-mana 2/2 flyer, enter the battlefield, destroy a 4/4 flyer, right? They play an Urbis Protector or something, and they just, you're right, they lose because I have ways of clearing all their creatures. They play as Slime Molding, right? Slime Molding for a bunch, and if I don't have just a counter spell, right, that just stops them, right? Is it Charm their Slime Molding? I still just bounce their Slime Molding. So I feel like the token strategy is pretty bad because there's a lot of ways to bounce tokens and prevent you from getting there. I really don't want to be playing these green-white decks, but there is sort of a role for green in that Penumbra Spider is just an excellent defensive creature, and there are cards that are great, like Arachna Spinner, Harmonize, Urban Evolution is decent, right? There's a lot of kind of control-y ramp type cards, Sylvan Ranger, maybe Explorer, Avacyn's Pilgrim, that complement a controlling strategy. You don't have to be the green-red, go wide, or green-white populate. So I don't know. I think there's kind of a sub-theme going throughout green that makes it relevant, but otherwise I really don't want to be green. And at the same time, I think I lower in my sort of draft ordering any picks for fixing that involve green. I move down a peg. I just don't think they're very good. I think most commonly, because it's hard to get that sort of 4-color control type strategy going, most commonly I think if I'm playing green, I'm playing it in like Jund, right? And I'm playing it just so I can play Sprouting Thrynaxes and things of the sort, right? A Golgari Germination maybe. I'm really not sold on green. I thought this color was okay, and now I just don't think it's very playable at all. I think if you want to be an aggressive deck, you got to be really hard aggressive and get under a lot of these control decks. And if you're just sort of this mid-range deck trying to play Call of the Conclaves and populate, I don't think you get there because I think there's just way too much bounce in this format. For white is interesting because it is adjacent to blue and black. Whoops. And it has a lot of interesting things going on. Gideon's Lawkeeper is fantastic. This card is really solid. Soul Warden is also okay. Core Skyfisher can let you... I think Core Skyfisher, the way I've come down on it, is you really need to have some enter the battlefield effect that you're rebuying. If you have that, it's good. If you don't, if it's just like a 2-mana 2/3, maybe effectively a 3-mana 2/3, same reason I'm not as sold on Talon Trooper. I just don't think that's quite where you want to be in the format. But I've had games where I play Core Skyfishers and I bounce back like a Dinrova Horror, and I'm just going to Dinrova Horror into them again. I'm perfectly fine with that. So this card is still very, very good because it's easy to get those types of decks. I do think you want to be one of those types of decks, so you don't want to just be playing this and bouncing back, I don't know, like a Soul Warden or something. But yeah, white has some good things going on for it. Deputy of Acquittals is kind of good for like blanking removal spells. I think that's kind of interesting. But a lot of this is where I don't want to be, I've decided over time. I don't really want to be playing Attendant Knights. I don't really want to be playing Core Hookmasters or Talon Troopers. I think the removal is pretty bad. You kind of have to take things like Pitfall Trap and Aether Toe to make this deck work. You ideally get Path to Exile, but you can't always get that. And I think the only card that's really moved up a lot in my estimation of things, at the common slot at least, is Eyes in the Skies. I think Eyes in the Skies, even when I'm just putting 2 1/1 white bird creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield, and I'm not even really populating like a big token creature, that's decent. That's reasonably good. And I'm kind of willing to accept this as like a bad Lingering Souls. In any case, a lot of the removal in this format is 1-for-1, right? And if a Magma Jet only eats half of an Eyes in the Skies, I'm fine with that. That's good. That's decent, right? There are a lot of decks that just don't really have a good way of dealing with these bird tokens, right? These bird tokens will just do a bunch of damage. Again, like kind of in these control mirrors where they have a lot of, we both have a lot of 1-for-1 removal, and some guy at the end of turn plays Eyes in the Skies. You know, Eyes in the Skies is sometimes just better than say a Spire Monitor, right? Because a Spire Monitor, they'll just snap off the removal and they'll kill it. Eyes in the Skies, you know, if they use some removal on this, they're only getting half of it usually, and you're still beating in for one, and they have to have an answer ultimately, right? They have to have a way of dealing with your tokens. This has been a lot better than I've expected. The Populate is a nice thing, but I really just like that this card can put 2 1/1 flyers on the board. I think that's been relevant. The uncommons are also really strong. Lingering Souls is as good as I thought it was. I mean, everyone knows Lingering Souls is amazing. Lingering Souls is great for the same reason that I've come around to liking Eyes in the Skies. A lot of the removal in this format is 1-for-1, and 2 1/1 white flyers eventually just puts a lot of these control decks on a clock. It's really hard to deal with this card. It's good. Everyone knew it was good. It's fantastic. Miss Meadow Witch, I talked about this. I think it's fine. Path to Exile is good. There's been a choice in a lot of my drafts of whether or not I take Flicker Wisp or Herbis Protector, and I've seen, and I think a lot of other people have kind of come to the conclusion, or that Herbis Protector is actually the better card than Flicker Wisp in this format, which is one of the things that's changed up since I've played a little bit more. I guess the issue is Flicker Wisp fits more into that green-white mid-rangey type strategy that I don't think I like, right? It's sort of an aggressive flyer, and you want to be blinking something good. I think it's better to just have a bomb. I mean, this card, even if I'm not blinking the Herbis Protector or whatever, even if I'm not populating or doing anything like this, just putting on a 4/4 white angel creature token onto the battlefield is pretty good. And to have any sort of synergy going on anywhere else makes this very good. I think the splicers are all pretty solid. Master Splicer and whatnot. Again, it's the same story. They're just, you know, if I put a 4/4 golem onto the battlefield, that's a threat. So those are about as good as I would expect. But I would say, like, the cards that have gone down, in my estimation, are a lot of the populate mid-rangey cards, like Wayfaring Temple, Bronzebeak Moa. Again, I just don't think that these cards are where you want to be. I think they're very powerful. Again, I still think they're very good in what these decks are trying to do, but I've rarely seen them get there, because I think the best decks in the format are blue-blacks, X decks that have removal for these guys, right? Your Bronzebeak Moa is going to die to a Magma Jet, and or an Agony Warp, and that's going to feel really bad. Your Wayfaring Temple is going to die while it's still small. There's enough removal in this format that these guys just get targeted out and killed, and if the rest of your deck is just 3/3s, right, or something along those lines, right, you're playing Centaur healers, I think it's really hard to get there. I think that these decks work pretty well against the aggressive decks of the format, right? Centaur healers are something that's going to beat that mono red deck pretty easily, but I don't think that's where you want to be in this format. I certainly don't think you want to be at some sort of unflinching courage type thing. Again, all these enchantments I think are really bad. There's just so much bounce. Gift of Orzhova, same thing. So I've come around to the view you should be drafting the higher costed cards. So I actually would value Herbis Protector more than Flicker Wisp these days. And I've seen that happen in my drafts where I see both Flicker Wisp and Herbis Protector in a pack, and the Flicker Wisp is what wheels. So that's where I think white is at. The signets I still value very highly. They're fixing and they're ramp, which is very good in this format. And so I think everything I've said about how powerful signets are remains. I do think, though, that you value a little bit more the fixing than the ramp, I guess. I think if I was given the choice between a tri-land, like a blue-black tri-land, and a signet, I'd probably choose the tri-land these days. If you handed me Crumbling Necropolis or Arcane Sanctum, I think I'd be taking that over a signet. But any signet that has blue or black in it, I think, is going to be pretty highly valued by me. I think that's just the best colors in the format. Let's go to the rares. Which of these rares performed, which of them didn't? So, a lot of these did not perform, I want to say. Some of them I didn't expect to perform, but a lot of them kind of fell flat. Trying trying to remember what my estimation of a lot of these was. Death Shadow is okay. I got beaten by a Death Shadow deck in I think in one of my online series or online things, but that was, I don't know. We had to get kind of unlucky for that to happen. Ultimately, the guy won because he played Denrova Horrors, and that was really what got me. But the Death Shadow was one of the threats that he stuck. I still don't think this card is very good. Ulvenwald Tracker, I think, is really strong. I like this guy a lot. I've moved up a lot on Cyclonic Rift. I think this card is pretty good because a lot of times you're getting to that overload cost, and that's pretty strong. I don't know. I've never played with this card, only against it, and I beat it when I went up against it, but I've come to appreciate this card more as sort of a late game threat, ways of breaking through a board stall that are pretty good, and I think it kind of gets there. It's tricky though because again, a lot of the decks are like a lot of the games that I've played, you're just sitting there not really having a lot of creatures sometimes because you're both really hard control decks, or you're in a situation where if you bounce all the guys' creatures in Alpha Strike, you're still only dealing like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 damage tops, and you might not have had a lot of incidental damage going up against the guy going into that, and so he just gets to replay a bunch of his creatures and get a bunch of advantage off of that. I don't know. I'm still kind of down on this card, but I like it more. Mizian Mortars is fantastic. This card is amazing. I don't think any game where I've overloaded a Mizian Mortars I've been able to lose. This is almost like just a 6-mana one-sided board wipe. It's pretty fantastic. Phantasmal Image is okay. Again, it's tricky because you need to have something on the battlefield to copy, and with a lot of instant speed removal, sometimes they kill your copy target. I think this card is good. But I'm looking more for like a bomb with my rare. Speaking of bombs, Simic Sky Swallower is actually just a bomb. This card is very good. This is one of the reasons I'd splash green in my sort of control deck. I like Broodmate Dragon. I'm not big on Wart. I'm not really big on Niv Mizzet either. This is kind of still a hard mana cost to cast. I need to be like blue, black, red. He's good, but I don't know. There are other bombs that I like more. I'd probably rather be playing just a Simic Sky Swallower and just beating in with my Flying Trample Shroud, which is just really hard to deal with. Extractor Demon I like a lot more because the milling your opponent is actually a viable win condition sometimes. Deadeye Navigator, Obsidat, these are also really strong. Falcon Wrath Aristocrat is also just good, right? This is a win condition. Evil Twin is fantastic, I think. I've played a lot with Desecration Demon. I've been past it a lot. I guess a lot of people don't value it. I still value it pretty highly. This card is basically, you beat your opponent twice in the face and then they have to start sacking creatures, otherwise they die. In a control type matchup, this guy is really good. I think having more than 4 health is one of these things that prevents you from dying to a lot of the removal in the format. They need some sort of unconditional removal to get rid of this guy, and it's kind of hard to do that. This guy, I still think this guy is very good. People keep passing me this, but I think it's very strong. Restoration Angel is fantastic. I think Seance is quite good. I think second to last draft that I posted, I played a Seance deck, and I thought it was really strong. The deck really only lost to a guy who entreated the Angels twice. So, I don't know. I think this card is solid. Venser is really good. Yeah, a lot of these rares are good. I think what you want to be focusing on is you want to be focusing on something that gives you repeated value or is a bomb. And, there are some solid cards like Blade Splicer here, which can be really good. But I do think you want to get to some point where you have some bomby card in your deck that'll win you the game, right? That'll close out a game for you. And whether that's just a 5/5 flyer or, a 6/6 Flying Trample Shroud is pretty solid, or just you're getting some Broodmate Dragons or something, right? You want to have some creature like Deadeye Navigator that's ultimately going to close out the game. Cruel Ultimatum is also really good, I think. But you want to find some closers in your rare slot, I think. I think that's ultimately what you're looking for. Some way of closing out a game against a guy who might have gained 10 life this turn, or has enough removal to get rid of just your Falcon Wrath Nobles. You need some way of closing out a game. I don't think, again, I don't know, maybe it's just personal experience. I don't think relying on just like a 2/2 flyer to close out the game is the strongest of strategies. Again, in the last draft I did, it worked 2 out of 3 of my matches pretty well, but yeah, I think you want to find some way of winning the game with your rare slot. And if you can find that, doesn't matter if it costs a lot of mana, right? Like, I would first pick a Cruel Ultimatum. I'm almost at that point. Like, I understand this mana cost is crazy, but I want to be blue-black. I like splashing red, and this is one of these things that'll usually finish a game, right? They'll lose a creature, they'll lose their hand, they'll lose life, right? Like, I like this card a lot. So closers is what you want to have here, and that is sort of what colors a lot of my view of a lot of these cards. That cards that can act like a closer, like Cyclonic Rift, have moved up in my list. Cards that can't act like a closer, things like Blade Splicer, still a very solid card, but I don't value it as highly, I guess. And yeah, I'm more interested in having the Deadeye Navigators and things of this sort to close out a game. The 6 mana cost doesn't really scare me as much as it did at the beginning, where I thought, well, you know, it's going to be a slow format, but maybe not that slow. It is that slow. Pick up these guys. Pick up the Broodmate Dragons if you're in those colors. Whatever, right? Like all these big cost cards are really good. Mythics, a little bit less relevant because you just never really run into them. Entreat the Angels is fantastic. This card is, along with Bonfire, I think just game-winningly good. Yeah, this card is insane. I've lost to it. I've played it and won with it. It's just really amazing. Sphinx's Revelation, I think, is also very good. This is, you know, nothing too surprising. Almost all these cards are really good. Linvala is probably an exception. Tarmogoyf is still not super relevant. Cavern of Souls not really that great. Past in Flames, but most of the other things are pretty solid. Right? Olivia Voldaren is still a beating. Craterhoof Behemoth is a closer. And I know it seems crazy. Like, again, I was talking about Craterhoof Behemoth and Gristlebrand in the context of, oh, well, if I have a way of reanimating these guys, maybe I get there. I've had games where I can basically just hardcast a Gristlebrand, right? And that wins me games. I'll be playing against some, you know, sort of aggressive deck, but I stall them out, and eventually I just hardcast a Gristlebrand, and they lose the game because they have no way of dealing with it, and it instantly is going to stabilize me because I'm just going to hit them once, or even if they attack in, I get the lifelink. And so yeah, I think a lot of these higher costed cards have moved up a lot in my evaluation. And so my advice, I think if I go back to like the best commons and uncommons, my advice is value more the higher cost stuff. I'm missing Dinrova Horror on this list. I would put that up there. I think these signets are all still very good, but I would have Urbis Protector on this list as well. I'd probably ditch Gore-Clan Rampager, Bronzebeak Moa. I think you want to be a slow, control-y deck in this format. I think blue-black is the best archetype. Ideally, you want to have fixing so you can get another color in there as well, whether it's white, whether it's red, whether it's 2 colors, right? And you get more. I think when you take things from green, either it's going to be like Sylvan Ranger for fixing, Avacyn's Pilgrim for ramp, things of this sort. I don't have it on here, but Urban Burgeoning and things of this sort. And I think you want to otherwise stay away from sort of the base green decks, right? You don't want to be the deck playing Call of the Conclave, basically. That's my view of things. I know that's a surprising thing, but I don't think the 3/3 tokens get there in this format. And if you're going to be an aggressive deck, you want to be nearly mono red, and you want to have a lot of Mog Flunkies and Burning Tree Emissaries and Dragon Fodders, just a lot of 2 drops. You want to skip basically the 3 and you just almost don't want to have any 3 or 4 drops. Everything else in your deck, you want it to be burn, right? You want it to be Chandra's Outrage, Thunderous Wrath. And that's going to be the basis of your deck here. The Mog Flunkies, Chandra's Outrage, Thunderous Wrath, Burning Tree Emissaries. That's how you build an aggressive deck, nearly mono red. And if you splash a color, you probably actually splash white. And you take things like Core Hookmaster, and you take things like Skynet Legionnaire, and you take Sunhome Guildmage, and yeah, you're not going to support a 3-color strategy in an aggressive deck anyways, because a lot of the lands are coming to play tapped. If you splash a second color, I think you might as actually well be splashing white and going Boros. That's been my change of view. I know that enemy colored guilds are not really supported very much in this format, but since you're practically mono red anyways, I think it's fine doing that. Actually, that's been one of my changes, and so that's it mostly. Lesson of the story: draft fixing very highly. Tri-lands are great. Draft high-costed cards fairly highly as well, and unless you're playing that mono red, nearly mono red aggressive strategy, right? And I think if you follow the kind of those rules, that's what'll get you success in this format. I can't say that I've had a lot of success. In paper, I've done really well. A lot of that is just because the level of competition at sort of your local game store or among friends, I think, is not quite as strong as it is on Magic Online. And on Magic Online, I don't know. I still have a 2-1 record, pretty much. I have 1 and 2 series set. I have 1 3-0 set, and then I have 6 2 and 1 sets, which is not great from a value perspective because a 3-0 gives you 6 packs and a 2-1 gives you 2 packs. So there's a pretty big leap in prizes between the two of those. I also just haven't opened a lot of value. But I don't know. I would count that as reasonably successful in this format, even though it only has given me 1 trophy. So I think I don't know. I feel like this is one of the formats that I understand well enough to give advice on. Other formats, I wouldn't feel that way. But I think I have a reasonably good understanding of the format at this point, and that's my advice on the format: is play blue-black, control, late game, draft your fixing high, draft high-costed cards. And the only real exception to that is when you're playing near mono red and you're playing it like you just get as many Mog flunkies as you can get your hands on, and Chandra's Outrage, Thunderous Wrath for finishers. And there you have it. So that's my sort of recap summary of the format. This is probably the video that I'm going to watch if this format ever gets flashbacked and I get to play it again. This is going to be the one that kind of informs me on what I think is good, what I think is bad. And yeah. Stay away from green, I think, for the most part. Blue-black is where you want to be. Format is slow. Jinrova Horror's good. Fixing is good. That's the summary. All right, I've rambled on long enough. Have a nice day.